My boyfriend died after I let my insecurities fuel our toxic relationship. When you end things with me, I just keep drinking and drinking, he said, but I pushed him away. Now I'm left with haunting regrets and the weight of my demons. What if I'd just loved him better? About a month ago, although it feels as if it was just yesterday, my partner passed away after spending the final days of his life in emotional turmoil due to our relationship. In this relationship, I struggled significantly with trust issues, feelings of low self-esteem, and I constantly questioned his love for me. None of this was his fault. These issues existed before I met him, but somehow I projected them onto him, which manifested as moodiness. I now realize, although it is too late, that I should have sought help. Our backstory: I met him 2 years ago after a night of heavy drinking. I had just ended a long-term relationship. We hooked up, talked afterward, and began spending time together. Pretty early on, I noticed a side of him that I couldn't understand. It was a mix of meanness and an uncanny ability to see through me and point out my flaws. After our second meeting, he hardly left my place. I was lonely and appreciated his company. That is how our relationship started. Few weeks in, I realized that he had a drinking problem. That issue caused the mood swings, and the intoxicated version of him was pretty honest. During the first year of our relationship, I desperately tried to save him. I don't know who I thought I was. One of his verbal attacks that caused me the most pain occurred when I told him, "Please be better, stop drinking." "Why are you ruining your life?" he retorted. "You are a failure, your life is a disaster, you have debt, unpaid rent, and you're angry." Instead of focusing on my life's chaos, I endeavored to fix his. By that point, I was deeply attached. He would drink and binge for days. When he was sober, he was a deeply sensitive, good, and kind person. We officially moved in together. I asked him to move in and urged him to find a job. His job search took a long time. During that first year, I resumed therapy and pushed him to go to rehabilitation. He would attend, and then stupidly and sadly and selfishly, we would express that we missed each other, leading him to come home, partly because I said I didn't know if I could wait 3 months. Thus, he returned to me. Immediately after he left rehabilitation, he would start drinking again. I began therapy, during which I experienced severe suicidal thoughts. His presence in my apartment, coupled with his drinking, made me feel despondent about my life. Every time he binge drank, I would kick him out of the apartment. I would subsequently search for him and call him back, creating a relentless cycle during the first year. The reason I would kick him out was that he would hide bottles and lie about how much he was consuming. He lied directly to my face. In therapy, I discussed my distrust of him, and I expressed frustration that it had been a year with no job. My friends encouraged me to leave him, but I simply could not. I held on to the hope that he would start working soon, even though I felt resentful. My therapist would ask why it took him so long to find employment. When I raised this with him, he insisted he was trying. Fast forward a year, I move, and I take this as an opportunity to question whether we should remain together. He insists he is trying. I do not add him to the lease but feel lonely and convince myself he will secure a job. He eventually finds a job and starts paying rent. He also locates an outpatient program, and his binges decrease significantly. This is where things took a turn for the worse. As he was trying, my inner doubts about him intensified. I began to believe he was obsessed with his ex-partner for some reason, which caused my mood to fluctuate. At times, I would withdraw from him, questioning his love for me despite his daily affirmations of love. I simply could not feel it. He did not plan dates, buy me gifts, or compliment me. Once he started earning money, he slowly began taking me out, but only when our relationship was flawless, which I now understand meant he desired a stable, good relationship. However, our sex life was quite fulfilling. If he had a problem with something I did, he would shut down and I would have to extract it from him. I must also mention that his sense of humor at the beginning of the year felt like mild bullying to me. When he was in therapy, he told his therapist, this is from him, that sometimes I pick up on his mood changes, but he simply does not know what he is doing. The therapist replied that he might be gaslighting me, so he asked me to point out when this occurred. I developed extremely poor coping habits in the second year. Sometimes I would intentionally hurt him after feeling unloved. If we had an argument and he did not speak to me, I would leave the apartment to go to clubs. This was incredibly foolish. I didn't want to be there at all, but in my mind, since he was not communicating with me, it felt justified, so foolish. This behavior triggered his binges in the second year. After the binges, we would talk, have deep conversations, and start over. Yet things escalated so much in the past few months. Sometimes he was silent, and I interpreted this as a mood swing or him being upset with me. I never gave him space, and minor events would set both of us off. I also adopted another abusive behavior. I began taking the keys from him after arguments. This infuriated and saddened him. I did it sickly to gain control and prevent him from being in the apartment or having access to it in case he drank. In the second year, his binges were only triggered by our arguments. If I did something foolish like leave after a disagreement, I would return home to find him intoxicated. In our discussions, he would tell me, "I'm just hurt and it's how I cope." I have many examples of his binges. I suffer from severe obsessive-compulsive disorder and can be controlling. I also have a dog. Our work schedules were different, so he would be home when I was away. My overwhelming trust issues stemmed not only from his drinking but also from my own self-worth. I had set up a camera that he knew about but didn't realize I was actively using it. One day I was running late and asked him to take my dog out. I saw on camera that she started running around and he abruptly yanked her leash, causing her to cry. She developed a fear of him, sometimes peeing when she saw him. This upset me, so I confronted him about the footage I had observed. He apologized, acknowledging that he crossed a line. Another time we came home and my dog had a small accident. There was also water on the floor. I expressed my anger about her peeing and my frustration that he had not taken any steps to help her feel comfortable around him after what had happened. He denied it was pee, so I picked it up and showed him up close that it was indeed pee. He then picked up the water and insisted it was not urine, even holding the napkin too close to my face. In response, I picked up the pee and shoved it in his face too. Surprisingly, he pushed me against the wall and smushed my face with the napkin. I was shocked, but I also knew I had retaliated. I asked him to leave and the binge drinking commenced again. To be fair, I had also gotten physical previously. For instance, the first year after we returned home from a night out, before I fully understood the severity of his drinking problem, I exited the Uber and turned around to find he was gone. While in the car, he had been chatting flirtatiously with the driver, which is at least how I perceived it. So when he walked in, I asked him to leave, and when he didn't comply, I resorted to violence and punched him. I acknowledge that I am an abuser. He was a quiet guy, and this caused discomfort in me for reasons I now realize were nonsensical. At his best, he was loving, enjoyed cooking, and cherished spending time with me. In those moments, I felt completely in love and behaved well. He would say to me, "If you behave, I won't binge. You can be yourself and have your moments. It's when you attack our relationship that I feel sad, leading me to drink because I know you want it to end." Almost every time we fought, I threatened to end things. He would just sit quietly and take it. Before this last binge, he experienced another that lasted a few days. This one too was partially my fault, although it strangely provided clarity that we both had unhealthy patterns. I had bought a car, had become busy with work, and he was also employed. I asked him to help me and he said he was busy. This felt odd. Little by little he started withdrawing, which made me panic, as our relationship had always been characterized by constant communication. Suddenly he changed his behavior, taking longer to respond to texts and becoming distant. I tried to ignore it at first and even bought him a treat to cheer him up, but nothing worked. He went to visit a friend without telling me. I confronted him and he responded that there was no reason for me to feel like ending things just because he didn't share his whereabouts. He hadn't lied, just hadn't communicated. That night we ended up in bed together. I took his phone and dashed out of the apartment with it. Honestly, I didn't expect to find anything incriminating because of my past jealousy. I only wanted to see pictures of his exes. Finding nothing, I returned home where he was already drinking, and that set off another binge. When he sobered up and I asked why he had withdrawn from me, he said he felt unappreciated. When I asked for help with work, he explained that he felt his time wasn't valued. Everything clicked into place. We were good until we weren't. Valentine's Day arrived and I was feeling elated. We were in a good place after that binge. He worked with me that day and then we parted ways. We exchanged phones since he had no service and needed a phone for a job, yet my obsession made me want to rummage through his phone to find anything concerning his past. I know I'm sick. I didn't find anything beyond some adult content. When he came to meet me, he wore a joyous expression that I will never forget. Earlier, he had tentatively mentioned wanting to go out for dinner. It was Valentine's Day. As I spiraled into obsessive thoughts and felt low because of what I had seen, I confronted him about the pornography, assuming that if things were good, he shouldn't be watching it. My thoughts spiraled out of control. I accused him of being unfaithful and he called me crazy, only doing so after I pressed him on the issue. Our conversation escalated into tears and I noticed that he hadn't got me anything for Valentine's Day. I cried uncontrollably. His response was that he had tried, they just ran out of flowers. He remained quiet while I expressed my feelings, and after I apologized, we decided to go get some food. By then, he was in a mood but agreed. There was tension when he pushed me to decide what I wanted. Afterward, we picked up some street food, but I had to return to work and couldn't spend the night. Before leaving, I promised to stop by the next morning. When I got to work, I felt uneasy and sad. The dinner hadn't been enough. I went back and forth, suggesting that perhaps he should go to rehab and that we should take some time apart. He replied non-committally, agreeing that he was tired of my mood swings. The next day, I had a doctor's appointment and decided not to visit our apartment during my break. I just didn't feel it. Midday, I thought about surprising him and walked in to find him carrying a large bottle of vodka. He looked shocked and said to me, "This is partly your fault." I started crying, and he demanded that I stop crying and take responsibility. I believe I wanted to place the blame on him. While he was in the apartment, I had to return to work and couldn't be there. My obsessive-compulsive disorder and controlling tendencies intensified. I saw him staggering drunk around the apartment. The dogs and cats were not allowed in the room, but they were in there with him. I felt out of control, unable to do anything. I devised a plan to come home and force him out, even if it became physical. I know I am abusive. I wish I could turn back time and handle things differently. When I arrived at the apartment, he was inebriated. I asked him to leave. This was foolish. One cannot reason with a drunk person. I threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. He didn't care. I then searched for my car keys. He had borrowed a car for work. Previously, when I kicked him out, he would sometimes sleep on the street. I knew I was being cruel, but I could not stay around the intoxicated version of him any longer. He would constantly lie about his drinking, and something caught my eye. I noticed the car key was missing. I panicked because the car was registered under my parents' name. Moreover, during his binges, he would sometimes have accidents, so it seemed silly, but it was a worry of mine. I confronted him, but he denied taking the key, which sent me into a rage. I pushed and hit him, and I am deeply ashamed of this. He had no reaction. I then grabbed a blade and threatened to harm myself. He took it away and passed out in bed. I left. The next day I called the police and he finally departed. Upon stepping outside, I searched for the car and it was parked where it should have been. Part of me doubted my intuition that he took the key, but when I checked, he was in the car. I demanded he give me the key and he insisted it wasn't there. I left, and at that point, part of me did want out of the relationship. I resolved to let things be without repeating my past behavior of chasing him to bring him home. The following day was hot. He came home to retrieve his wallet. I asked him once more for the key, but he refused. I believed he was still inebriated. Something within me refused to fight for the key. I accepted my circumstances. He walked away. 2 days passed without me checking on him. I wanted to move forward with my life, trying to force myself not to. There was a friend attempting to persuade him to go to rehabilitation with the understanding that he would pay for it. That friend reached out a few days later and I informed him where the car was parked. I received a frantic call and rushed out of the apartment. My boyfriend was dead. He was purple and stiff. I couldn't believe it. The man I loved so deeply and had hurt so profoundly was gone. There was no life left in him. He had drank himself to death. I kept replaying his words in my mind. When you end things with me, I just keep drinking and drinking. I have many regrets. I wish I could take back all the ways I hurt him. There were numerous instances. I wish I had told him just how much I loved him. Although I did express love often, I wanted more from him. He only gave me what he was capable of, and I was never satisfied. As a side note, he had struggled with addiction for a long time. When he met me, it was his first attempt at rehabilitation. He also mentioned that it was the first time he had fallen in love. For some reason, believing that was difficult for me. Since his death, I am haunted by thoughts of ending my own life. He was such a gentle soul. I allowed my demons to triumph. I embraced my chaotic side, and now he is gone. I have used drugs in an attempt to connect with him, so foolish I know, and nothing has worked. I feel utterly ashamed. I want to be with him now. I do not deserve to be alive if he is not. He was trying, and I kept pushing and pushing. Say it all to me, please. Wish me dead, and maybe I can finally go through with it. Story 2. After rekindling with Jay years later, she chases me saying, I just want to be in touch with what makes me feel good. But I hit her with, how you gonna be mad at what I do, knowing you go home to another man every night? The thrill faded, but I still wonder what could have been. Now I, 40, male, have been grappling with the repercussions of this situation in my mind for several years, manifesting in vivid daydreams and occasional night sweats. I can feel her. I can smell her. I can hear her. I can taste her. This woman, whom I will refer to as Jay, and I connected during our early adulthood. A mutual friend introduced us. This was before the internet, so I had no idea what she looked like. I was 19 and she was 18. We spoke on the phone for hours at a time over a few weeks. I enjoyed our conversations. She was into sports and a martial artist like myself. She was sweet. She was articulate. She was bold. So when we finally decided to meet, it was nothing major, just a meet and greet. Honestly, it was love at first sight. She had big brown eyes, perfect mocha-colored skin, juicy lips. She was short but powerfully built. It was one of those situations where you just knew things were going to heat up, and they did. On the 4th of July that year, we spent the day together at her house in her neighborhood. She lived in the affluent part of Clovis, and it was quite a shock for me coming from a lower middle-class area. I remember watching the fireworks with her, and things became hot and heavy afterward. It was amazing. It was everything a young man could desire. It felt almost too good to be true. With school approaching for both of us, I thought it was best for us to leave things as they were. I remember her crying when I informed her. I cannot lie, I felt terrible because of it. A year passed, I moved out of my mother's house and I found faith. By this time, I was deeply involved in church. One random day, while I was meeting a mutual friend whom we called Love at a local basketball gym, she appeared. As beautiful as ever. She was there with what appeared to be her high school boyfriend. He was a football player at our local junior college, a tall, strong-looking guy, but it didn't matter. Once again, things heated up. I invited her to church with me and it was nice. Since I had just found faith, I was trying to play it cool until I got married. However, after spending so much time with her again, I couldn't resist. I remember asking her why she was so bold about us. She responded with a quote I will never forget. "I just want to be in touch with what makes me feel good." After a while, she practically lived with me. We always had a good time. I looked forward to seeing that black Pontiac with custom wheels pulling up to me. She accompanied me everywhere work church and when I was hanging out with friends. Everything felt right. I loved treating her well and seeing her being treated well. Then suddenly it all stopped. I remember waiting for her to come home, but she never did. We exchanged a few messages about some guy she collaborated with musically, but I never assumed it was that serious. I loved her, yet something prevented me from fully trusting her. Days passed, weeks passed. It was entirely different. I had a lot of responsibilities at that time and threw myself into them to distract from what was happening mentally. I knew I loved her, but I had to live without her. The end of this second chapter occurred in September and October. I had included this woman in every aspect of my life. She met my mother, brothers, and sister. So being in my hometown of Fresno, California was challenging. I decided to move in December to escape it all. I relocated to Las Vegas, where my father lived, and for a brief moment, I could somewhat forget everything that had happened. It was not until late April of the following year that I returned to pick up some items I left at my brother's house. I visited one of our local malls, fashion fair, and ran into her. She had a newborn baby with her. At that moment, I didn't give it too much thought. I was just happy to see her, still beautiful. But later that night, thoughts flooded my mind. Was the baby mine? Why hadn't she told me? Did she cheat? Regardless, it felt like I had narrowly escaped danger, confirming my decision to leave. However, even then, my mind often wandered to what had transpired and how I could have altered the outcome. I remember looking her up online and assumed the man she was with won a contest for a paid wedding from one of the local TV stations. It was something straight out of a movie, I cannot lie. She appeared happy. And despite my internal feelings, that was all that mattered. About a decade later, in 2017, I had traveled throughout the nation and even left the country a few times. I was nearing the end of my marriage and fully embraced the bachelor lifestyle. I cannot deny it, I loved that phase of my life. My friends celebrated how I was living as I was like a real-life Bill Bellamy from How to Be a Player. It was a good time. My friend Love posted a humorous video of a comedian dancing to Return of the Mac, claiming that was how I was moving in the video. There was some truth to that, I cannot deny. But later that day, as I sat in my car on a rainy day in Dallas, my phone notifications went off. It was her. After a moment of nervousness, I replied and we exchanged pleasantries. She asked for my number and I agreed. It felt good to hear her voice. We spoke for about an hour, catching up. She told me about her marriage, which was in the process of failing, to a man named Leon. I was surprised, but given my mindset at the time, I went in for the kill. I told her that she wouldn't divorce that man, considering they appeared to have a fairy tale life, excellent careers. She was a nurse, and he was a sheriff, beautiful children, and a large house in a gated community. But being the player I was at the time, I merely confirmed what she wanted to hear. I'm going to get in touch with what makes you feel good. Surprisingly, she was on board with the idea. That was the last call, and I didn't hear from her for several years. But I knew just as she did. It was on. Fast forward to 2020. I found myself in California on a work assignment. I work in the transportation industry, and when COVID hit, I couldn't pass up the opportunity. About a week after I arrived in California, word spread that I was back in the area, and it seemed as though women from my past, present, and future emerged from the shadows. Since I was in my player mode, I wasn't turning down any advances. Then once again, she appeared in my messages. We exchanged numbers and thus began our conversations again. She would call me while I was at work and vice versa. We reminisced about past and present times. We confided in one another about our marriages. I was finalizing my divorce, so I was truly enjoying my newfound freedom. On the other hand, she was possibly being cheated on or something, I wasn't sure. Honestly, I didn't care. It just felt good to talk to her again. As the days went on, our conversations grew heavier. I requested some photos. Show me something. The pictures came. Once again, she was undeniably gorgeous. Same mocha brown skin, same big brown eyes, same incredible smile. She was the standard by which I judged other women. She had matured into her adult body, and I appreciated every curve. I remember her asking when we would be together. I had to be smart about it, but her being a traveling nurse worked in our favor for making this happen. We agreed never to meet in Fresno, as it wouldn't be safe for either of us, but anywhere else would be fine. We planned to meet for the weekend in Modesto, where I booked a nice Airbnb and she agreed to meet me there. I cannot lie, I was nervous. I arrived first and set everything up, roses and all the romantic touches. She came straight from work looking good even in her scrubs. She walked in and we shared a warm embrace. She still smelled the same. Since she had just finished working, she went to freshen up. About an hour later, she emerged in a short silk robe. I cannot lie, I froze momentarily but quickly regained my composure. We sipped wine and engaged in light conversation. Then she mentioned her back was bothering her and requested a back rub. I understood what that meant. Over the next few hours, I proceeded to indulge in every way possible. The touch wonderful. The moaning incredible. Her taste amazing. I remember our earlier conversations where she would boast how nobody could keep up with her, including the younger version of me. This was true, but times had changed. It felt fantastic to be with her again. She was the first woman I ever spent the night with. After those multiple rounds, we lay in bed, the ceiling fan going. I got up to check my phone, which was charging near hers. As I picked up my phone, I noticed a message on her screen from her child saying, "Mommy, I miss you." I let out a silent sigh and returned to bed, pulling her close as we drifted off to sleep. I wasn't going to worry about the outside world, as everything I desired was right there with me. On day 2, I prepared breakfast for us before she headed to work. While I relaxed throughout the day, she was eager to return. Everything felt excellent. It felt right. It felt like home. We mostly repeated the previous night. I remember her asking if she was the one who got away. I never gave her a straightforward answer, but under pressure, I admitted that she was. As we were cleaning up the next morning, I recalled her looking at me with a loving gaze, and I mirrored it. A bottle of wine spilled, but we cleaned it up with an extra towel she had brought. I helped her pack and we returned to our lives outside of that weekend. It was wonderful. It felt right. I found myself at work replaying the weekend in my mind, vivid images of her filling my head. I recalled our conversation regarding her husband. She said he went out to her car and noticed a strange smell. When he asked what it smelled like, she replied, "Wine and sex." I cannot lie, I laughed. She laughed. It was a good moment. The week continued, and we began following each other on social media. I had a large female following despite my red pill, Kevin Samuels-style posts. I would log on and talk all sorts of smack while entertaining the women who followed me publicly. This is where things took a turn. I remember her inquiring about them. Given our arrangement, I noticed a hint of jealousy. Who is she? Why do you talk like that? The audacity, but I shrugged it off. We made plans to meet again in Modesto, where I had booked a truly nice Airbnb. We both arrived from work exhausted yet excited for what was to come. She went to shower while I sat downstairs, eating vanilla ice cream and watching New Jack City. She came downstairs wearing a robe, along with a black bra and panties. I cannot lie, that night I felt like Nino Brown. It was precisely the kind of New Jack City energy. The world is mine. I took her upstairs to the master bedroom and once again indulged. It was Friday and she went to work. I enjoyed the city while scrolling through social media. That day, women were flirting more than usual, but I ignored it. I respected her enough not to entertain other women during this period, despite the nature of our arrangement. I remember watching myself in the mirror as I was with her. Her phone went off and we locked eyes in the mirror. The following morning, the energy felt different. We still made love, but the goodbye was not quite the same as before, and I sensed that might be the final chapter of this. Later that week, she called me, asking about the women on my social media. I was feeling fed up with her one-sided possessiveness, so I questioned her. How can you be upset about my actions while knowing you go home to another man every night, baby? We fell silent for a moment before ending the call. I couldn't help but think back to the young woman she used to be. I considered the version of her now still stunning but lacking confidence and somewhat weary from life. I wondered, what had he done to you? We had both changed. Perhaps I was naive to the entire situation, thinking we could simply pick up where we left off in 2005. So the following week, while in Fresno for my off days, I booked a room on the south side of town. She asked where I was staying, and upon confirmation that I was nearby and feeling frisky, I invited her over. I should have known better because this was a violation of our agreement. She arrived wearing black and orange Nike tights and a sports bra, looking absolutely stunning. Once again, it was on. It was a quick encounter compared to our previous sessions, lasting about 30 minutes. Afterward, I walked her to her white BMW, and just as she was leaving, a Fresno sheriff car drove by in the parking lot. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside. My mind raced. Was she being followed? Why was a sheriff patrolling this area? At that moment, I realized things were escalating dangerously. About a week later, we met in Modesto. We were both exhausted from work but still made it happen as usual. It was enjoyable, but it felt as if the thrill had dissipated. After that, I didn't hear from her again that weekend. I still think about her, but I recognize it was for the best. I was still in love with this woman, but I knew it could never be more than it was at that point. It was fun, but some things must be left in the past for good reason. Now all I have left are those vivid images and thoughts of what could have been. Even though I cared for her time and again, I understood I could never fully trust her. Story 3. I sabotaged my friend Savannah's life because I couldn't stand her manipulative ways. I urged her boyfriend to dump her, claiming, "She'll ruin your life," and convinced my boss not to hire her, saying I'd quit if they did. Now she's banned from her parents' home. What happened next? So this occurred a long time ago, but I have never really been able to discuss it without fear of judgment. So here I am. All names are fake, although the story is so specific that if anyone involved finds it, they will undoubtedly recognize it. I am just relying on the statute of limitations being up by now. I grew up in a very small town in the South, and when I was in high school around my junior year, I found myself in the same friend group as Savannah. She was a year older than the rest of us and was the only person in the group with whom I had an issue. Everyone else was great. Now, something you should know about me is that I do not like conflict. Therefore, as I began to realize what a terrible person Savannah was, I did not confront her. I figured I had one more year with her, and once she graduated, I would not have to communicate with her again. Additionally, I really did not want to cause any trouble with the other members of the friend group because they were all wonderful. Given how small our school was, about 30 students per graduating class, it was very likely that I would have to see her again if we were arguing. I was complicit and cowardly, and I feel extremely guilty about not speaking up, especially now that I know the full extent of the outrageous things she has done. Firstly, there was the general unpleasantness of being around her. The conversation always had to revolve around her. Nobody else could discuss their problems because Savannah undoubtedly had something worse happening. You could never mention anything good that happened to you because it must have been an attempt to rub it in Savannah's face. You could not talk about your interests because they were dull and Savannah did not want to hear about them, and so on. All of this was irritating but far from the worst of it. Savannah referred to herself as a little boy crazy. I would call her a creep. She consistently pursued younger guys. Most of the guys she dated in high school were 2 years younger than her, but at least a couple were 3 years younger, which is not a significant age gap but is certainly odd for high school. In my opinion, dating someone 2 years younger would be acceptable if it were not such a clear pattern for her. She appeared to be controlling in most of her relationships, but I only really know about two of them. The first was Jordan, who was dating another friend first. Savannah and he began dating almost immediately after he broke up with our other friend. She really hated it when anyone, and I mean anyone at all, would talk to him. If any of us complimented him, even just saying he did a good job on an assignment or something, she would either burst into tears, yell at us for betraying her, or both. Once we were out shopping, and she saw him speaking to an older woman who must have been his aunt or something. She started crying, saying how she hated it when he talked to other girls and how he must have done it deliberately to upset her, which was just alarming. Anyway, he broke up with her and began telling people that she was crazy, but for some reason she was convinced that she and Jordan were going to reunite. She repeatedly asserted that they were soulmates and spoke as though they were already back together. This was when her irrationality became much more evident to most of us, but we were all unsure whether we should confront her or what we should say. So we would kind of just listen to her rant and reply, "Okay, Savannah, calm down." Eventually, she began leaving classes to go to the bathroom, only to walk down the hall past whatever class Jordan was in so that she could look at him through the small windows in the doors. She even openly told us that this was something she did, which is incredibly strange. Once, she left a party because she saw someone entering a store a couple of houses away that vaguely resembled Jordan. This behavior progressed to following him home several times until his parents threatened to obtain a restraining order, at which point she backed off. I am so amazed that anyone remained friends with her at this stage, but I suppose we were all afraid to upset her or something. Either way, I am ashamed to have continued associating with her. After that, she started dating another guy, Ryan. She had asked his older brother to the homecoming dance, but he said no, so she asked Ryan instead. Ryan was a sophomore, his brother was a junior. Throughout her relationship with Ryan, she referred to him as buddy and kiddo, which makes me want to be sick. She exhibited much of the same possessive and controlling behavior, and I became very concerned for Ryan's safety because he seemed extremely uncomfortable around her. One time he told her he was uneasy about the level of physical contact she was displaying and asked her to reduce it. She came into the next class sobbing and told us that her boyfriend thought she was creepy and clingy. They attended prom later in the year, and she tried to sit in his lap, but he told her he would prefer not to. She was crying in the bathroom and I comforted her, but I later reached out to Ryan privately. I shared all the details of what had happened with Jordan. He already knew the general story because everyone in my hometown is aware of everyone else's affairs, and showed him a picture of her holding the sign she made to ask his older brother to homecoming, which he apparently did not know about. I advised him to break up with her and to make it clear that he did not wish to reconcile. I also suggested that he warn his parents in case something similar happened to him as it did with Jordan. He ended their relationship the following day, and she was heartbroken. Fortunately for us, not for her. Her parents took away her car and phone shortly thereafter, stating that she would regain them once she found a job. Her parents had been providing her with a generous allowance for nearly her entire life but had apparently been telling her for several years that she would soon need to find employment. According to her, she informed them that she would not search for a job because she wanted free time, and that was when they confiscated her belongings. By that time, I had been at my job, a retail position in a nearby town that paid reasonably well, for about a year. I obtained the position due to a recommendation from a friend I met at summer camp, and Savannah knew that they took recommendations very seriously. So when her job hunt was going poorly, she told me she was going to apply at my workplace and requested that I recommend her to my manager. I told her I would speak to the higher-ups and was very friendly to her face, but when I went into work next, I asked my manager if I could speak with him privately. I informed him that someone might be applying soon under the name Savannah and that she would ruin the supportive environment that he and every other employee had worked hard to cultivate. I expressed my absolute certainty that if she were hired, I would resign on the spot. Needless to say, she was not employed there. It turned out that my workplace was her last option, and she did not find a job for the remainder of her senior year. I heard that when she left for college, her parents informed her that she was no longer welcome at home due to her irresponsibility and untrustworthiness. I have no idea if that is accurate. According to one of the other friends from the group, she returned to town and attempted to get an invitation to the prom a few years after graduating. I do not really care because I am currently all the way across the country from her and do not have to deal with her anymore. Regardless, she is a despicable person for whom I feel ashamed to have tolerated for so long. I ruined her life behind her back, and no matter how many times I try to find a reason to feel guilty, I do not.